America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Ready? All right, ladies and speaker. Stand away from the speaker. My name is Dave Poole. I'm one of the two co-chairs here in Steele County. I'd again like to thank all of you for coming in this evening of global warming that we have outside. Nobody was too daunted not to come. I just real briefly explain a couple of the rules for you. Our moderators, Jack and Ben from the AM 1130 morning show. If you do not listen to them, I would recommend that you do. They are the source of inside knowledge for Minnesota politics. I listen to them every morning religiously. My wife will attest to that.
Sorry.
Yeah. So we're going to have each of the candidates introduce themselves and give a 2-minute intro. We have a timer down in front. The timer is going to hold that card up way high if they go over their allotted time, and we're all going to point to the candidates and laugh if they go over. Right? During the evening tonight, we have questions that have been submitted. Some of those questions have been submitted by the Steele, Waseca, and Rice County Executive Boards. Some of those questions have been submitted online or in paper, and we have still the availability, if you'd like, to submit questions over Twitter, the hashtag #OutStateDebate. So we'll have a 2-minute introduction for each of the candidates, then we'll move into questions. We'll pose a question to the candidates. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer. The bulk of the debate is going to be just exactly like that, but we do have a couple of curveballs to throw in here because nobody likes a very boring and very dry debate of canned speeches. So if one of the candidates says something that one of the other candidates does not quite agree with, we have, there's that speaker, we have essentially almost like a challenge flag. We debated having yellow challenge flags like the NFL would, but the candidates would throw them and would somebody get hit and hurt, and then we'd have a lawsuit. So each of the candidates can have a 30-second rebuttal, 2 of them. Okay, that's what these little cards are. We'll ask the candidates when you take your 30-second rebuttal, you just need to tell the moderator that you'd like to speak to what some of the other candidates said, put down your rebuttal card. We also have one other thing, and that is the non-answer or the non-specific answer. If one of the candidates gives you an elevator speech or a platitude or something that is so non-specific, you don't even know what they said, our moderators over here have the ability to press them for an actual answer. So they will, again, the moderators can give them 30 seconds to redirect the question and come back to what it was.
Yeah, we get to call BS.
So if you hear a non-answer, maybe start rolling your eyes and looking at the moderators, and they'll know that we're looking for something out of them. After that, we'll have some 2-minute closing speeches again, and then we'll wrap up the event. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and we will get started with our moderators, Jack Tomczak and Ben Cruzy.
That's a microphone, Representative Zellers.
That's still their veto man?
That's what
That's still their veto man.
All right. Thanks for the invitation to moderate the debate. We will do our best to make it entertaining and lively and not dry and focus so much on just the policy. We'll start with you, Rob, and we'll go down the line. And then the next question, we'll start with Jeff. Next question, Dave, and then I'm going to go in a circle. All night. Highway 14 has been repeatedly named one of the most dangerous roads in Minnesota by NPR and the Star Tribune. But MnDOT doesn't even have the road on its 20-year plan to be upgraded. Instead, the metro area is having yet another light rail line built. How will you address this as governor?
This is Jack's first time as a moderator. Each candidate gets a 2-minute introduction. You cannot use the MnDOT thing in your introduction, but you can say that.
I've been up since 4 in the morning. Sorry. 2-minute intro, Rob.
Well, thank you. I'll make it quick. I am Rob Farnsworth. I am a special education teacher from Hibbing, so I get the award for farthest traveled to this event tonight. I live in Hibbing with my wife Jamie, who's a nurse, and our 3 children. I graduated with a bachelor's degree from St. Thomas in history, earned my master's degree from Mankato in special education, And of all of the candidates here, I am probably asking for the biggest leap of faith. I'm asking you to vote for a candidate that is a bit more out of the box than what you're used to. Because Republicans, generally, we have two areas that we select our candidates. One, somebody with legislative history, or two, a wealthy business person. And I fit neither of those, but I think that's exactly what we need to win this election. If we look at state level elections that we've had, all the way back to 2002, we have not had a majority. So we have had to rely on the independent candidate, and we cross our fingers and hope that the independent candidate takes more votes away from the Democrat than from us. And we need to stop shooting for 45% and start shooting for more than 50%. And I believe that I am the candidate that can actually get us from that 42 to 47% range to the 50+ range. And hopefully with some of the questions tonight, I'll be able to answer some of those reasons that I am that candidate. Again, thank you for allowing me to come, and I do want to apologize. As soon as 9 o'clock hits, I'm out the door because I have to work tomorrow, so make sure you grab some literature so that you can check the website. Thank you.
Well, I am Jeff Johnson, and I want to thank you all for being here and for doing everything you do for those of us up here and for the party. I'll give you a quick background for those who don't know me. I grew up in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. My wife is from Crookston. We went to Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota. Spent a few years away in Chicago and DC, and now we've been in Plymouth for the last about 20 years. We've got two boys. Thor is 15 and Rolf is 12. I've spent the majority of my life in the private sector, both as an employee and as a self-employed business person. And then also 6 years in the Minnesota House, and now for the last 5 years I've been on the Hennepin County Board as the often lone, loud voice of some level of fiscal sanity in the wilderness of Hennepin County. And I am seeking your endorsement for governor, and I'll abide by that endorsement because I think it matters and I think it's our best path to victory. So I'm asking for your support tonight, but as I do it every time we have a forum, I want to ask for one other thing too. I just want to ask that each of you don't just listen to us and look at us tonight in your role as a Republican activist, but also try to put yourself in the shoes of your independent neighbors, maybe even some of your Democrat neighbors. What are they going to think of us? Which one of us is going to be able to connect with them on a personal level? Because we're going to need them to win. And that doesn't mean we compromise our principles or get wishy-washy or blur the lines. I've never done that, and it doesn't work for us. But what it does require is that we recognize that we need to pick a candidate who can make a personal connection with everyday Minnesotans and somebody who can share a relevant, positive, conservative message that actually inspires voters, not just Republican voters, but all voters. That's what we're going to need to do to win. So I just ask you to put on your neighbor's shoes and look at us both from your standpoint and from theirs, and I hope to earn your support. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dave Thompson, and I would like to acknowledge my wife, Rhonda, who is here, and thank her for coming out tonight. She spends a lot of time at home without me in the evenings and spends a lot of time coming here with me to do these kinds of things. And I greatly appreciate it. Those of you who have been around and seen we've got some literature out here, I think you can learn a little bit about me personally. My wife and I have a couple of children, a junior in college, a daughter named Amanda, and a son who's 18 and a senior at Lakeville South. But I want to take this time to talk about why I'm here tonight that I think corresponds with why you're here tonight. And that is that we believe in something. We believe in the importance of the individual. We believe in the importance of the American ideal, of the government not pushing itself down on the people, but rather the government being subservient to the people that are put first in our society. And we are looking now at a governor and at a legislature that looks at it exactly the opposite way. And I try to tell people elections are so important because it is about worldview. It is not about differences on the margins like tax rates at 7.8% versus 7.7%. It is about a difference in worldview, where people in this room and the people on this stage believe that we need to let the individual, to the extent possible, govern their own lives, create opportunity for themselves, achieve something that they're able to master and succeed at, and have purpose in life. Government should facilitate that, not get in the way of it. And when you have a big oppressive government that's into regulation and into high taxes and into all kinds of spending, it represses the individual. As it is said, that government that can give you anything you want can take everything that you have. So I'm here tonight simply because I believe in limiting the scope of that government and changing the way we do business. I want to thank Jack and Ben for being here, and I think it's good that you're getting experience doing this, because it's kind of like Dave, I kind of religiously listen to your show, and I'm surely be looking for work soon. So.
Well, thank you to Dave and Randy for putting this together, an invitation to come down here. My name is Kurt Zellers. I'm a former Speaker of the House, former Minority Leader, and proud dad to Reagan and Will. And there's two reasons I'm running. It's not just for Reagan and Will. I'll tell you selfishly, I want to be able to watch them grow up. I want to watch them build their business here in Minnesota. I want to watch Will sell medical devices for the next startup, not for Medtronic, not for St. Jude, but the next startup. So I'm selfish in that way, that I want him to have that opportunity here. But the second reason is, I think why we're all here, is to beat Mark Dayton. We've all watched. It's been an embarrassment to watch how he raises taxes that he claims he didn't know were in tax bills. He embarrasses our state by saying that he's going to make us more competitive, out chasing .com companies for 20-some jobs, while several dozen jobs out of southwest Minnesota are leaving the very day he's out in San Francisco soliciting companies. He's made our state uncompetitive. Reagan and Will won't have a job. Your children, your grandchildren won't be able to build that business here in Minnesota if we continue on this path of uncompetitiveness and limiting business by government intrusion. I'm also one of Ronald Reagan's happy warriors. I believe as a party we have to be for things. My first day on the job, I will open up the precious metal mines that we have up in the Iron Range. This is our North Dakota oil field, folks. It is copper, nickel, palladium, titanium. It is a North Dakota-like oil field that will pale in comparison. We will have billions of dollars worth of revenue, not just coming into the state, but new economy, jobs, entrepreneurs, factories being built on the Iron Range and all across Minnesota, if we just have the courage to open up those mines. As your governor, that's my job. I will be not only the best salesman, the best cheerleader, but the best advocate for you as Minnesotans all across this great state and all across this great country. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I hope you get an idea of what we're all about by the time we're done here tonight. But thanks again to Dave and Randy for the invitation. And don't let the fact that I was on with Jack and Ben this morning cloud your judgment at all on your questions.
We question your judgment.
Now can I ask questions?
Go ahead.
Anybody? Yeah, okay.
It's not accurate that I've never done this before. 2 years ago, I did moderate a debate for our Senate candidates, and I forgot the closing segment. So I've done this before, so keep an eye on us.
So one of you
toward the
four,
end.
just remind us at the end.
Yeah. All right. Highway 14 has been repeatedly, this goes to you first, Rob, repeatedly named one of the most dangerous roads in Minnesota by NPR and the Star Tribune. But MnDOT doesn't even have the road on its 20-year plan to be upgraded. Instead, the metro area is having yet another light rail line built. How will you address this as governor? Rob, 1 minute.
This is easy. Shut the light rail down and shift the money. We're not making a priority of the transportation that people actually use. The light rail, the problem with the light rail is the people that will ride it would have ridden the bus. So the bus that currently is 15% subsidized will now be more subsidized. The light rail will continue to be subsidized, and our roads will deteriorate. I do not support raising the gas tax to pay for our roads, but I would take money from the general fund to put it towards our transportation system. And I'm not talking about a shift like the education shift that has to be paid back. I'm talking about permanent shift in funds. One area we could look at is social services. The governor talks about his huge investment in education of $270 million. He increased health and human services by $4.58 billion. You're telling me that there was no room in that $4.58 billion to shift to transportation so that the productive people who are paying taxes can actually get to work? I think there's plenty of room.
Jeff, do you need the question repeated?
No, I'm good, thank you. Well, actually, the mayor got to me with this question while we were standing out there. He said, what about Highway 14? And my honest answer to that is I don't know specifically about Highway 14 versus any other project. But what I do know is that we have a terrible time prioritizing when it comes to really anything in state government, but in particular transportation. And this is kind of my life on the Hennepin County Board. Trains, transit are sacred on the Hennepin County Board. We have a lot of 6-to-1 votes, I being the one vote, based upon really a similar concept to what Rob just said. We need to fund the forms of transportation that people use and want to use to get to where they want to go when they want to go there. And it's not trains. To a certain extent in the Twin Cities it might be buses, but But I have yet to see a light rail plan or a commuter rail plan that actually was cost benefit efficient at all. So I think we need to back off entirely the light rail and start funding our roads and bridges until they're where we want them to be, and then we can talk about alternative forms.
What should a transportation system be? It should be a system that as efficiently as possible moves people in the way that they want to move as safely as possible. We have two problems in Minnesota. Number one, we're not moving things the way that people want to move. We're building light rail systems and doing that sort of thing instead of accommodating vehicles, which is what most people use. And then secondly, we don't even prioritize safety, so that a highway like this isn't taken care of when it is literally a risk to people's lives. So it is a matter of priority. And the fact is that you've got an awful lot of social engineers that are in the legislature that believe that they should dictate to us how we move from point A to point B, rather than allowing people to make those decisions and then creating a safe system in which they can do it. So it is simply a matter of philosophy and priority. We need to fix the dangerous roads. We need to beef up the roads that need more lane miles, etc.
But first and foremost, as you prioritize, just by canceling the train, which I don't think you get any disagreement with up here, I would do like Chris Christie. If you can't figure out where you're going to drive, which way the path of train is supposed to go on, then you cancel the train. They're still fighting about it. The governor's fighting with the mayor of Minneapolis, who's fighting with residents of Minneapolis. All the while, Highway 14 isn't getting funded. The second specific thing you do is you have a prevailing wage that is in greater Minnesota different and lower than it is in the metropolitan area. You all out here have to suffer under the burden of having wages set by Minneapolis, not by Waseca, not by Wilmer, not by Rochester. We actually introduced that bill when we were in charge of the legislature. I know you're all gonna be shocked, the governor didn't veto it. I know. That's two specific ways, and then you prioritize by public safety, not by who has a seniority down at the Capitol, whether it's House, Senate, or in the legislative seat. You prioritize it by crashes, by safety, and then thirdly, by regional distribution within an area, not just based on, we divide the whole state up and prioritize that way.
You mentioned that there seems to be a little bit of short-sightedness when it comes to legislators in Minneapolis and St. Paul. They don't seem to recognize that there's a state outside of the metro area. This is a farming state. What is the one thing that you would do as governor to help make agriculture in Minnesota more competitive? We'll start with Jeff Johnson. 1 minute.
The one thing I would do that would be at the top of my list would have to do with environmental regulations, and we can't base our agricultural decisions on what environmental activists want. And unfortunately, I think we're seeing that all over greater Minnesota with this particular MPCA, with the DNR, and with certain other agencies. And I think as governor, you instruct your commissioners as to what the philosophy is to be. And the philosophy is, we care about the environment. We know farmers care about the environment. We care about conservation. But we're not going to let a political philosophy and agenda get in the way of people making a living and doing what they need to do.
Well, first off, we need to repeal the taxes that Governor Dayton and the legislature passed into law during the 2013 session that are directly affecting farmers. That is just disastrous, and we've got to repeal those. Then secondly, we do need to look at the tax structure overall, and we need to create a tax system that is not biased against investment and those kinds of things. And then we do need to look at the regulatory atmosphere as well. In fact, my in-laws, who farm up in northwestern Minnesota, ran into a situation where they were trying to put a dike around their home, their farmstead, up in the River Valley. And they literally had 2 or 3 regulatory agencies here in the state of Minnesota that made it so burdensome for them that had they not had a son-in-law who was an attorney and willing to help them through this, they literally might have decided to move off of their farm. Now that is a government out of control and we need to stop it.
I think, number one, you ask farmers, what is it standing in the way of you selling more product, whether it be beef, whether it be pork, whether it be corn, soybeans, or wheat overseas? And one of our farmers here, even down in the valley, could feed probably every single person in this room for 5 years. We have some of the best, most productive farmers in the world, not just in the country, in the world. So we've got to get more of what we're producing here out to the rest of, not only the country, but the rest of the world. More importantly, it means that you're not going to make it a regulatory burden The sales tax on equipment repair, you're close enough to the Iowa border, you've probably heard the stories about Iowa implement dealers coming up, getting the equipment, bringing them down to Iowa, fixing them, and then bringing them back up here, waiving the charge for hauling the equipment. I think that's probably the number one thing. The second thing is the gift tax and the estate tax. What Governor Dayton has done for long-term family planning, this is a kid from a 130-plus-year family farm. He is going to absolutely limit kids' ability to inherit their farm based on tax policy. That is an abomination to the heritage that we have built our great state on.
I don't pretend to know a whole lot about farming, but the farmers that I've talked to, probably 8 out of 10, when I ask them, what is the biggest obstacle that you face, they talk about environmental regulations. But the second thing that they say is the cost of energy. And I think that we need, in Minnesota, we need policies that don't increase energy costs. And that's why I'm not in favor of raising the gas tax or the diesel tax. Our businesses, including farms, don't need to pay more. My wife and I could probably afford 5 cents more a gallon, but farmers, business people couldn't afford that. And then, electricity, they need to have those costs down, and because of a lot of these environmental rules, getting electricity from these so-called renewable sources, it's driven double-digit increases in the price of electricity. So we need to repeal those so that farmers aren't paying as much for their energy, and they actually can make a profit.
Next question starts with Senator Thompson. Senator, what is your position on the renewable fuel standard passed by the legislature last session? You have 1 minute.
Well, I oppose it. We've increased the standard. We have put upon our energy business to try to meet unrealistic goals of renewable energy. And then also, I don't accept the premise that we need to do these things. The goal of energy production should be to produce energy in the most efficient way possible, in the lowest cost way possible, to get it to the end user. When you look at our economy, driven by things like smartphones, which my wife is holding, so I'm not distracted by my pocket. When you look at things like smartphones, you'll thank you, like that, thank you. Exhibit 1. And you look at the kind of transportation economy we have and other, our ability to have a healthy economy and raise standards of living going forward is largely dependent upon energy. We are not going to get that by taking money from the taxpayer and subsidizing businesses that aren't successful and efficient on their own. Because remember, folks, if a business is efficient and has a rate of return in it, you don't need to subsidize it.
Well, I think calling it a renewable energy standard is a misnomer on its face. They excluded one of the easiest forms of renewable energy, hydro. All you need for hydraulic energy is gravity, water, and a turbine in between. These folks that passed this new standard omitted that. Why? Ask yourself. Because it was not just a renewable energy standard. This was an environmentalist wish list. Hoping, praying that now, just this time, if we just give it a little more oomph, solar and wind are going to be the answers to our solution. All of you have seen Xcel Energy is out for a rate case right now. Back a few years ago, a previous governor had a renewable energy standard. Out of 201 legislators, there were 12 of us that said, you know what, this isn't going to mean your energy is going to be cheaper. It's not going to mean we're going to have more and safer, more and renewable energy. It's just going to mean more expensive wind turbines out and dotting our prairie. I was named one of the toxic 12 for voting against it. I knew it was going to cost us money then. Sure enough, it is now. This next one is going to be even worse. We should stop before it makes your electric bill even more expensive.
First of all, I'm not convinced that Al Gore's documentary is completely accurate. Or that global warming, well, it's not global warming, they changed it to climate change because, of course, you can't explain global warming if it's not warming, but it must be climate change. I'm not convinced that that is man-made, and as a result, I'm not convinced that we need to, force companies, force individuals to have this so-called renewable energy. Now, as far as the most recent bill, one of my biggest problems is when we talk about the solar panels and people being subsidized for putting solar panels on the roof of their house. Who can afford that? It's not middle and lower income people, it's upper income people. So they're gonna buy the solar panel, put it on their house, and then they're gonna get the subsidy, but the power companies aren't gonna eat that. They're gonna pass that cost on to somebody else. So lower and middle income people are gonna be paying for the solar panel that's on the roof of somebody who could have afforded it without a subsidy, and that's a problem, and it's actually kind of counterproductive for what the Democrats claim they're trying to do.
I would not have supported that bill either, and I think it's important for us to point out that alternative forms of energy are great, And the private sector is going to provide them to us at some point when it actually works and makes sense. Government can't force that by subsidizing it. But eventually, if there are alternative forms of energy that are cost efficient, the private market is going to identify those and they will be there for us to use. I heard somebody say the other day that the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. It ended because human beings evolved and figured out new ways of doing things, and that's exactly what's going to happen with energy. So I certainly wouldn't have supported that, and I don't think energy subsidies have really ever proven to make sense in the long term.
Story everyone seems to be talking about these last couple months. Kathleen Sebelius used the word debacle to describe it, Obamacare. Minnesota is inexorably tied to it with their healthcare exchange MinCare, which is having its, or MinSure, which is having its own problems. If the Obamacare system falls apart, as many are predicting, what can Minnesota do to be ready for the collapse, and how will you lead on the issue? We'll begin with Representative Zellers.
Sure, and I think it's not a matter of if, but when. And the MinSure, we've had it in front of the committees. Dave and I saw it a number of times, not only in committee but on the House floor. They couldn't answer the two critical and essentially important questions to what they're asking you all to pay for. Are more people going to be covered, and is it going to be cheaper for all of us? Without fail, not one of these folks can answer it. I don't think the president, how many of you in here have seen the $2,500 in savings that the president promised you? How many have had your plans canceled? How many are going to lose your doctor? At the end of the day, Minnesota had the model. In order for us to adopt what the president and the federal government was going to send us, we would have to go from way up here to way down here. We deliver high quality at a low cost, and we had some of the best technology. All you have to do is drive down the road to Mayo Clinic, and you know what innovation is in technology. We have the answers here. Minnesota, and when we were in charge of the legislature, introduced medical savings accounts for individuals who do not have children who are single. They were going to be able to make their healthcare choices. The individual can decide better than the government.
I might be one of the few people in the room that thinks this, but I'm not convinced that the collapse of Obamacare is going to cause this huge ripple effect. It's a good thing, of course, but the reason I say that is all of these young people that were supposed to be enticed into buying insurance because of Obamacare aren't buying insurance. They're the people that were supposed to buy these programs. So if the program collapses, they're going to be in the same situation that they were. Now, as a state, what we need to do as far as to be ready for the people that were kicked off their insurance is we need to remove some of the mandates that we have on our own health insurance so that our state insurance, the insurance that is sold within our state, is cheaper. One of the mandates that is on the books has to do with providing wigs for people who have received chemotherapy. Now, I'm not opposed to that, but is that something that insurance companies should be mandated to provide or not? And I don't think that's the case. We need to make it more cost effective for people. But I don't believe that it's going to be a huge problem because not all people are signing up.
One thing I think that we have to keep in mind as Republicans who don't support MinSure and don't support Obamacare is we can't focus too much on all the computer snafus. Because that has been, both at the federal level and here in Minnesota, that's been a huge embarrassment, but that's not the real issue. The real issue has to do with the actual program and this concept of government essentially limiting choices for people. And that is just such a great message for us as Republicans, is that we are pro-choice when it comes to health care. We want more options, not fewer. And as you get into certain parts of Minnesota, the options get fewer and fewer under the MinSure program. And so when it does fall apart, because I agree it will eventually, we just have to be prepared to offer more options and more choices. And I agree with Rob, fewer mandates in this state so that people have more choice with respect to their health care.
Just so we're clear, I've been given 60 seconds to talk about the collapse of the healthcare system and rebuild it. This is a little tough. What we need to do to guard against it is we need to be ready to put back in place some of the programs, particularly for the elderly and the poor, that were in place in the state before they were eliminated by MinSure. Because make no mistake, Minnesota had a pretty good system relative to the rest of the nation before this governor, because of his excitement over Obamacare, made us tear it down. So we better be ready to put those systems back in place. And Rob is right, not to protect the young, healthy individual, but to protect the elderly and to protect the poor and the infirm. We've got to have those systems ready to go. For everybody else, we should build a system that is controlled by the doctor and the patient, the buyer and the seller, with responsibility there. I'm a huge fan of major medical insurance policies and individuals having a medical savings account that they pay for their own routine medical care on their own. Put the responsibility and the control and the decision-making on doctors and patients.
Outstate question. We'll start with our outstate candidate, Mr. Farnsworth. Outstate Minnesota has thousands of small home daycare businesses that will be affected by the daycare unionization bill. If the law is upheld by the courts, what would you do as governor to give the right to work back to these business owners? 1 minute.
I'm glad you asked this because I'm the only person up here that's a union member. I used to be the union president, but with that said, I am embarrassed at this forced unionization for private businesses. So if this is upheld, the question is, what would I do as governor? I would sign a law. Of course, Governor Dayton tried to do it with executive order, to make this happen, and that was shown that he can't do that. So I couldn't do an executive order. But I would push for the legislature to overturn this, and I would sign a law that would, again, get private businesses back to being private businesses, because I'm not in favor of forcing in-home daycares to unionize.
Amen. I don't know what to add to that, other than to say, I would certainly do the same thing. And here's another example of a great issue that we now have as Republicans, to reach out to a group of people who maybe haven't been with us in the past. I will tell you, my sister in Detroit Lakes has had in-home daycare for 25 years. And she is not overly political, and in fact, frankly, I think if I looked at how she voted over the years, it was probably left of center more often than right of center. She based it on who she liked the most and who she thought cared about her the most. She is so steaming mad right now about the daycare thing, and so are all of her friends whose kids that she has or who offer daycare. They at least claim that they will never vote for another Democrat again. Now, she might change her mind in a couple of years, but we better take advantage of that next year. And it's very personal and it's very powerful, and we got to make sure we use it.
There are a couple of things that need to be done. One specific and one general. The specific thing is we need to overturn the law that allows unionization of child care providers in this state. We need to simply get rid of that. And I believe that if we win the House and we win the governor's office, that we will be able to do that. There will be enough Democrats in the Senate. Of course, we'll still have a Democratic Senate because senators are not up for re-election in 2014, but we'll bring enough people along with us to make that happen. Second, we need to be a right-to-work state, or at the very least, we need to diminish the power of public unions in this state. Unfortunately, I was not able to get leadership to go along with this. I happen to be the chief author of the right-to-work legislation in the state Senate. Did get it through one committee and worked very hard to make it happen. 24 states in Minnesota are now right-to-work states, including the state of Michigan, the home of the United Auto Workers. People are starting to see it. The right-to-work states are the states where the economic action is at, where jobs are growing, the economy is becoming healthy. We need to be one of them.
Well, I think Rob started it off the right way. You absolutely do. Also, I think your actions speak louder than your words. I joined the lawsuit. It's an amicus brief, which is basically like being a cheerleader. Go, rah, rah, go get them. But we joined the lawsuit to stop the Democrat governor from unionizing these daycares because it was personal to us too. Miss Steph and Miss Kaylee, a mother and daughter team, took care of Reagan and Will when they were infants and when they were growing up. It is about the unionization also of in-home daycare attendants. In a lot of cases, this is your children, your niece, your nephew, who's caring for your grandma, your grandpa, or your own mother or father. So it's not just that they're trying to unionize daycare, they're trying to unionize personal home care attendants. This is a power grab by the unions in our state that are on a very downward spiral, and they're trying to grab whatever group they can, whether it's legal or not. If you own the business, as Ms. Steph said to me, Kurt, Kaylee and I own the business. How do we unionize ourselves? We have no employees. It wasn't about making sure that people had a voice. It was about forcing unionization on business owners.
In that, because Hennepin County was the Twin Stadium, and I helped kill that before it ever got to a vote on the Hennepin County Board, and I do not think it's too late. I think that it has been shown that the funding mechanism for the Viking Stadium is not realistic or sustainable, and I think that there is absolutely an opportunity for us to sit down once again and renegotiate that and go back to the legislature and say, we're gonna change what we're gonna do. It might be too late, unfortunately, by 2015, when one of us is governor, but there's certainly an opportunity for Governor Dayton to do it next year, and he should. It's an absolute embarrassment what they have done.
I'll talk about the stadium. I was an outspoken supporter, or excuse me, opponent of the stadium, and I opposed it on philosophical grounds. I don't think that's the kind of thing that government ought to be doing, and I opposed it because I believe that the funding mechanism would be defective. Can we put the toothpaste back in the tube? Legislatively, we sure can. I think the problem is we would very likely be tied up in the courts for a number of years, because certainly some that are involved in these transactions would come in and argue that contracts have been entered into on reliance that this deal was going to go forward. So it is unfortunately an extremely complicated thing legally. That being said, if this governor is a leader, and if this governor is concerned about the taxpayer, he made a promise that this stadium would not be funded with general fund money. He needs to find a different way to do it, because now he's taking it out of a tax that was going directly into the general fund. And no matter what you think about spending in human services or education or whatever it may be, literally money is coming now to go to the Viking Stadium that could be going to the classroom.
Not being one to buck the group up here, I will also talk about the stadium and say that from a standpoint of where they were taking the funding from, I took personal offense. I actually was one of the folks that helped with the charitable donations that were supposed to go to charity. And folks, this isn't the Maple Grove Hockey Association so that kids can have more ice time. We're talking about food shelves, battered women's shelves, equipment for hometown fire safety, for paramedics. This was things that were going to make a real difference in your community down here and all across the great state. And knowing full well that this was something that they looked at as an option to help them, I went out and I actually asked. I called some of the biggest spending charities in the state and said, will this work for you, and are you going to use it? Their answer was no. I told the folks at the Capitol who wanted to support the stadium, I didn't vote for it, I didn't support it, and they said, well, we believe it will. The governor's has an obligation. There's one place left for him to go. There are naming rights for the stadium as well as the court that goes up to it. The naming rights from the court should pay for the money that's coming out of the general fund.
The stadium is a much cooler issue, so I'll talk about that.
Ethanol's not cool?
I don't think that it's, at this point, unless we can impeach the governor and impeach the lieutenant governor, I don't think it's possible to put this genie back in a bottle. It's done. He seems determined to find money under the cushion somehow to pay for it. In my perfect world, yes, I would love to see this undone. It's a bad bill. It expands gambling. It's trying to mold people's behavior by punishing smokers to make them pay for it. So I don't think it's a good bill, but I don't think that they're going to break ground before this governor is out of office. One thing I want to say though, and it's sort of, I don't know why I'm doing this because Kurt is my arch enemy. But here's something that I'm tired of hearing about Kurt. They say Kurt should never have brought the bill up to vote on. And that makes me mad because what do we complain about with Harry Reid? Harry Reid never lets us vote on our bills, never votes on the Republican bills. If Kurt hadn't allowed the legislative process to be done, he would have been no better than Harry Reid. But other than that, I disagree with him on everything. Just like Harry Reid.
The next two questions, we'll start with Senator Thompson. Pick one of these. What can the governor do about the cost of higher education at state schools and universities? Or will you pledge to eliminate the Metropolitan Council? If you say the second one, we can all go home a little bit earlier. Shave 58 seconds off of everybody's answer.
Well, I never made it in the major leagues, but I know a hanging curve when I see one. Two things we can do with the Met Council. Short run, we appoint people to the Met Council, the 16 members, that have a completely different philosophy. Going right back to the light rail question and the like, that have a philosophy that transportation ought to be in place to efficiently move people from point A to point B in the way that they want to go. But the larger issue is eliminating the vast majority of what the Met Council does. Number one, I believe that it is taxing without authority to tax. And number two, it is getting into affordable housing, it is getting into all kinds of social engineering, those kinds of things. an authority like the Met Council should be in place to deal with infrastructures, such as such as sewer and water, that sort of thing. And then, when they originally started, they were in charge of managing parts of the bus system. That's it, no more, no affordable housing, no taxing, no social engineering, bring them down to their original role.
So you say 58 seconds is what I'm saying. And I'm not sure if I should take Rob's compliment, since he did compare me to Harry Reid. I think I'm a lot chunkier than he is, but that's, the Met Council is an easy one, because those of us who live, amongst it and underneath it, I would say, day in and day out, know exactly the problem. There are two things that I would do. First and foremost, I would cut the size of it down, because the less there are of the bureaucracy, the less trouble they can make for the rest of us. Second thing is you take away their taxing authority and make us accountable. Make the 201 legislators at the Capitol. Make somebody from Waseca say, well, why are you taking money away from Maple Grove, giving it to the city of Minneapolis? When we run our buses in Maple Grove, we actually pay for the buses with ridership. Minneapolis can't cash flow a parking garage downtown. Why are you taking from those that can and giving to those that can't, other than social engineering? Those are my two suggestions.
I think I'm gonna go with the education one, but can you repeat it, please?
You bet. What can the governor do about the cost of higher education at state schools and universities?
I'm glad you asked. I wish I had more than a minute. I'm passionate about education.
Well, you don't. You have exactly 1 minute.
Now I have less. I'm passionate about education, and I have a different vision for that. I believe that every high school student in Minnesota should have the opportunity to, in their 11th grade of high school, start taking a full college load or start taking full technical programs so they can graduate from high school with 2 years done and paid for. We're already paying $7,000 per year per kid. So why don't we get a little more bang for our buck? Or kids that would finish with a technical degree would walk out of high school, 0 student loans. They could start paying taxes right away. My plan is different than the PSEO plan that they currently have, where kids can take a class here and a class there, but there isn't a real destination that they're trying to get to. They would be done with 2 years done and paid for that we're already paying for, which would reduce the student loans that they would have to pay. Now, that wouldn't reduce the tuition, and so, technically that wouldn't reduce the tuition, but it would reduce the total cost to the state and to students.
I'll answer the Met Council question as well, and yes, I would absolutely be willing to eliminate it, although I do think having a regional authority in the Twin Cities to deal with what it was originally created for, which was bus transit and sewer and water, buses and flushes, as we sometimes say, that is important, and I think that's, as a county commissioner, I would prefer to have somebody else doing that. What the big problem I have with the Met Council is that they are unelected and they have the ability to levy taxes, and that to me is just un-American. And I'd say the same thing about watershed districts. We have appointed officials in our watershed districts and they can levy taxes. And we should address that, because if someone has the ability to tax you, then you ought to have the ability to vote them out of office for it. So that's really the bottom line on the Met Council for me.
All right, at the end of round 2, Rob Farnsworth is winning because he has to drive all the way to Hibbing tonight. Zellers is second because he filled up Dave's water, and that was awfully nice of him because they're enemies. One of you, we've had you all on our radio show, Up and Adam, with Jack and Med, Monday through Friday, 6 to 9 a.m., AM 1130, does a killer Mark Dayton impression. If you do that Mark Dayton impression now, I will declare you winner. And we can all go. Any takers? The one who... Yeah. A year from now, one of you may win the election to become the next governor of the state. Will you, starting with Kurt, will you read the bills you sign as governor?
Again, trying to hit a
That's
beach
a
ball.
serious question.
I wrote it, but yes.
Okay.
Kind of in Dave's team, trying to hit this beach ball with a tennis racket. I will do my best. Yes, and first and foremost, I will know what I'm putting in my own budget. In all seriousness, folks, Governor Dayton said that he didn't know about the farm implement repair tax that was slipped into the tax bill at the end of the day by these horrible Senate Democrats who also put in the warehousing tax. Unbeknownst to him, it was in his original budget that he put out in January, February of that year. So if he was I get that he may have been tricked by the Senate Democrats, because they are tricky. But did he trick himself, or did his staff trick him when he originally put that into his bill? this is the kind of governor, this is the kind of uncertainty that comes to a business climate in your state, in your region, that makes us uncompetitive. This is what business owners look at and say, my God, how am I gonna do business in this state if the guy who's supposed to be leading us can't remember what he puts in his own tax bill? First and foremost, I'm not gonna have one single tax increase in any of the bills I sponsor.
So the question is, will I read the bills, right?
It sounds simple, doesn't it?
This reminds me of the Simpson movie, and I'm going to look really immature, but I just have to say, from the Simpson movie,
This is okay, we love The Simpsons.
they pay me to lead, not to read. Yeah, I'll read it, that's a simple question. What else can we expect of the governor but to read the bills that he signs? So yes, I will. Yes.
That's how it's done.
Most questions, I'm happy to go last, not this one. I think what you're getting at perhaps is taking responsibility for your actions. Taking responsibility for the things that you foist upon the citizens of the state. And it does seem as though Governor Dayton at times has been a little bit faster than that. And it doesn't seem as though he's paid attention to the things that he is signing. And what that tells me is maybe he doesn't understand the significant consequences of the job that he's doing. People who govern this state dictate success or failure for business people, dictate success or failure for children in a classroom, dictate whether people will move to Minnesota or move out of Minnesota. And so I think if the issue is, would we read these bills, would we pay attention, really what that is getting to is, do we understand the awesomeness of the responsibility of overseeing a state with 5.5 million people? Rest assured that I do, and I will feel very responsible every time I sign a piece of legislation, as I consider the consequences it has for the people that have given me the honor of being in charge of that office.
In lieu of Jack writing any more questions tonight, we have some that were asked from this audience. We're in them on note cards, but you've left your names off, so I don't know who asked these. If you're a little embarrassed by some of these questions, you shouldn't be. These are good questions. We begin with Rob. What is your view of the Tea Party and their influence on the Republican Party?
I have a positive view of the Tea Party. I'm a big fan. You know, the left likes to demonize the Tea Party, but basically the Tea Party is they want to get back to the Constitution, and it's that simple. And the left tries to make them seem like hate mongers, but I think it's a positive influence on the Republican Party. You know, we could use a little more of those groups that aren't necessarily mainstream Republicans, because a lot of people are tired of mainstream Republicans. You know, they're a little bit on the outside. Their values are the same, pretty much, as Republicans. And this might be my shortest answer of the night, but I think that it's a good thing.
I would agree with that. I think, I mean, the Tea Party is true grassroots, whether you agree with everything that that group says or not. And I think that they will have a significant effect on next year's election, just as the Tea Party did in 2010. I think I mentioned that the Tea Party groups, when I've talked to them, that I expect that this is going to be more like 2010 than 2012, 2014. And I frankly get myself in trouble with different factions of the party because I am very aggressively reaching out to all of them. So, you know, the moderates in the party, and there are still lots of Republican moderates, they get mad that I go to Tea Party meetings, and the Tea Party gets mad that I go talk to the moderates. And the Liberty people get mad that I talk to the establishment, and the establishment gets mad that I talk to the Liberty people. We can't win unless we have every single solitary Republican and Republican-leaning vote and as a starting point, and then we gotta go out and get a bunch of independents. So the Tea Party is a really important part of winning next year, I think.
Rhetorical, you don't have to raise your hand, but how many know the three guiding governing principles of the Tea Party? Constitutionally restrained government, fiscally responsible government, and free markets. How many conservatives have any disagreement with any of that? I don't think anyone does. I don't think of our party as being different groups or factions. I think of different coalitions. We have different things that are important to us, but I say the same thing to everybody. I talk about the fact that we want people to be able to have opportunity and pursue their dreams. What that means is we need free markets. We need the ability to pursue and do the things that you want to do unrestrained by government. That we believe we have a rule book called the Constitution, and that all of our lesser rules should comply with that. And that if government restrains itself to that, we have a better ordered society. I'm pretty comfortable with all kinds of different coalitions. I'm comfortable in boardrooms, I'm comfortable with tea parties. We all need to be in this together to beat Mark Dayton.
So was the question, do we like the Tea Party? Do we think? I'll say, heck yeah, I like the Tea Party, and I'm glad they're here. I'm glad they have the same ideas that we do. Lower taxes, smaller government, being able to allow the individual to go out and be free to either succeed or fail on their own, based on their own merit and based on their own drive and determination. Now, I've been a Republican for 24 years. I started as a college kid when I got my ankle messed up playing football, and one of my elder statesmen in the college said, hey, come with me to this event. It's going to be really fun. It was a 3.5-hour endorsing convention. Needless to say, I didn't believe him again. But that's what I was brought up, and as a farm kid, I mean, those are things that I wasn't told if I was a Republican or Democrat. And when we went to this thing, my friend asked afterwards, he goes, well, what do you think? I said, well, you know, I like the positions on this and that. I said, does this make me a Republican? And Al said, without blinking an eye, no. So that makes you conservative.
All right, this from Twitter. I listen to you guys every day, and you're better looking in person.
What, was that for us or for them?
I'm pretty sure it's directed at us.
Jeff,
I mean,
was that
look,
from Ben, or was that from the audience?
my wife follows me on Twitter. And then it just moved. Okay, don't let these guys get out of here without a tough ethanol question. We all avoided the topic earlier when you could choose. Well, now you can't choose. Who is next on this? Jeff? What should the state's involvement be with the ethanol industry?
I don't believe it should have an involvement, and it really goes back to the energy question that we were asked earlier as to whether the government should be subsidizing certain forms of energy, and I just do not believe that is, I don't think that's the way to create more choices. The government never is able to force a new choice in the market, so I'm not in favor of that.
I'm concerned about ethanol subsidies because, as I talked about earlier, if industries are efficient and can make money, you don't have to subsidize them. Here's the problem. We have, through government, created an unsupported market in the marketplace. We've created an artificial market, and by no fault of their own. There are well-intentioned people out there who are involved in the farm industry and industries that are ancillary and related to the farm industry, that can be badly damaged if we don't back out of this thing the right way. So while I'm all in favor of getting the government out of the business of subsidizing energy, it is not fair to do it cold turkey or do it in a way that harms people that have engaged in rational economic behavior based upon these incentives that government has given. So we must find a way to do it with a minimum of harm and dislocation to the hard-working people of this state that have been seduced by this industry that's been built up by government.
Well, I'm not sure if the tough question is based on the governor wanting to increase the mandate, which again is a bad idea. If we're going to mandate yet a higher standard when the current standard hasn't been proved to be effective and efficient, I'm not in favor of that. But to Dave's point, there are a lot of farmers. My family has been farming for over 130 years. We didn't grow corn the entire 23 years I was on the farm. We now have over 500 acres of corn. Is it because of ethanol, or is it because we're actually feeding more cows and more pigs now with feed, and we need that because we're importing more pork and more beef over to foreign countries like China and Indonesia? So whether or not the ethanol subsidy drove up the production of corn or the price of corn, I'm not going to be the one to debate that, because I think world markets are awfully intricate involved with our state's economy. But increasing the mandate to a level without the proof that it's actually going to make it more efficient and effective for our vehicles, I'm just not in favor of it.
I am glad I was last for this one. I believe in a free market and providing subsidies to one industry to try and, reduce our reliance on foreign oil isn't going to work, especially when we have plenty of oil in the United States if the president will let us drill it. But I am not in favor of these subsidies for a couple of reasons. One, it's worse on the environment, and I'm not an environmentalist by any means, but it takes more electricity, or it takes more energy to actually create the ethanol than it creates in an automobile when it's burned. That's a bad thing when it uses that many resources. The other thing is it's driving the price of food up. Corn is in everything. And when we take this amount of corn, or whatever agricultural product, and say that it has to be used for this, then it costs everybody a lot more money in the long run. So I'm not in favor of the ethanol subsidies.
It is election night. I figure I should give everybody in the room a little update. The declaration for New Jersey mayor is that Chris Christie will, Governor Chris Christie will be reelected. Currently in Virginia, with 77% of the polls reporting, the Republican Ken Cuccinelli is up with 2.5% over Terry McCullough. And surprisingly, quick result out of Minneapolis for mayor. 100% of Minneapolis polls are reporting that they are overwhelmed. So just a quick update on the election. We move back to our questions from the crowd. This is a very good question regarding a new national standards program for public school students. Are our candidates aware, are familiar with the terms of Common Core? And if so, what are your views concerning it? We'll begin with Dave Thompson.
Very familiar. I was sitting with a 3-ring binder in my lap yesterday, looking over some Common Core issues. I don't like Common Core for a couple of reasons. Number one, philosophically, I believe Minnesotans ought to make decisions about how we educate our children. It should not be made from afar. Secondly, some of the social studies standards are highly inadequate and don't teach the things about our country that I believe ought to be taught. We also have a lot of problems with the math standards. And I'm educating myself on some things such as sex education and other things that should best, in my view, be left to the family. So I do not support Common Core. I think it's problematic, and I would do everything that I could to reject it should I be honored to be your governor.
And I can come at this from a very personal standpoint. My wife Kim is a public school teacher. Actually, she's not here tonight, but if you could all thank her in your own way. She's at dance lessons with Reagan and hockey practice with Will, so God bless her. But we take this very serious in our home because Kim is a full-fledged member of the union, goes into the teacher's lounge every day, admits to being married to this Republican. We send our kids to a charter school, a public charter school, where we have core curriculum, not Common Core. So we do Saxon math, we do core rigor when it comes to science, when it comes to English, when it comes to technology. That's what our kids need to go back to. As governor, I would make our focus in the state core curriculum, high math, high science. We would focus on engineering. We would focus on physics. We would make sure that if you wanted to come and find the best dang engineer you could in all the United States, you'd come to Minnesota, because this is where they started in the grade schools. They don't wait till they get to college or technical school. They started in the grade school. I absolutely would be opposed to Common Core. I opposed No Child Left Behind when George Bush was in favor of it. Minnesotans know what's best for Minnesota.
The Common Core, in my opinion, is one of the most insidious tools that the left has used to try and get their message out. It was created by a bunch of academic elites funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The president said, if you agree to race to the top, and if you want to take the No Child Left Behind waivers, just agree to this Common Core. And by the way, Dave mentioned that the standards are lower, not just in math, not just in social studies. They're lower in English. They're trying to get away from fiction, so students won't be reading the greats like Shakespeare. Huckleberry Finn, they're going to change it to make it more politically correct. It is the most insidious, and it gets our kids early. And the math standards, to me, it's all troubling, but the math standards, they're abysmal. I mean, they're extremely low, and a lot of the stuff they're teaching in school today, so I see it in the schools, and I don't even understand how they're trying to teach it. They're saying 200 plus 700 reasonable. What do you mean is it reasonable? It's 900. It's insane.
Well, I don't support Common Core either, and that's actually something I learned a lot about when I was on the Republican National Committee, because we looked into that and passed an almost unanimous resolution against it, because a lot of Republican governors and legislators were supporting it, based upon the argument that it's a standard, and I think most of us like standards. But the two problems I have with it are, number one, the federal government shouldn't be involved in education, and certainly shouldn't be setting our standards. And then if you actually look at some of the curriculum, it is frightening. But it goes to a bigger question, I think, of how does our governor respond when the federal government says, we want you to do something and we'll give you a whole bunch of money if you do it. We see it in education all the time. We also see it in other areas, and we have to be willing as leaders to say no to that money sometimes when the policy is bad. And this would be a great example of that.
Us? It's you.
Dave started off with the binder, remember, Jack?
Thank you. Thank you. Representative Zellers, you're next.
That's a long question.
That was a dumb thing for you to do there. I'm kidding. All right. How, as governor, are you going to bring the private sector and jobs and industry back to Minnesota? 1 minute.
Oh boy, 1 minute or less. Well, actually, you start by asking them the question. What is it making Minnesota uncompetitive? What is it that we do that makes it harder for you, takes you longer, and costs you more capital to do business in our state? Then you go to school on some of the folks around us. You look at Indiana, you look at Michigan, you look at Ohio, you look at Texas, you look at the states that have been successful in stealing businesses away from those high-tax, high-regulated states like Illinois and California, and you use those as your base. Then you go out and you live and breathe the pride you have in our great state. We are smarter, we are faster, we are better, but we have to have a fair shot at it. And when you've got an anchor behind you and a plow behind that, because you have high taxes and high regulation, businesses don't have us at the top of their list. You've got to do more to bring fiscal sanity and predictability to your business climate. Adding new taxes and regulations every time the legislature goes into session does not do that. It brings uncertainty, and capital is a coward to uncertainty. It will not go where it is hard to make money or where it is hard to be productive. They will avoid our state.
Well, the first thing that we need to do is lower our tax rate so that we're competitive. That's the easy answer. Lower taxes and, deregulate many of the regulations that we have. But the other thing that I think we need to do, and when I talk to business leaders and when I look into this, business leaders say, yeah, we want low taxes, we want low regulation. But there are 3 areas that they look at, and these are the 3 areas that I think are fundamental to our state government that we should provide better than anyone else, and leave the rest of the areas to the state, or to the local counties and cities. And that is education, transportation, and public safety. Companies need to know that if they are going to relocate here or expand here, that their employees will be safe, and they consider that when they look at opening businesses. They need to know that the bridge is not going to fall out from under their truck when they're trying to transport goods. And they need to know that we have the best educated, have the most usable education in the world. And that's why my education plan, that would provide an incentive without costing us any more money for businesses, particularly in the trades, to open here.
It's not rocket science. The more government taxes and regulates, the less friendly you are to businesses and entrepreneurs. It's pretty simple. And I would say the starting point for us has to be, let's at least become competitive with the states that surround us. I would love in 4 years to be competitive nationally, but let's at least start with North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin, because we are seeing those 3 states actually stealing our entrepreneurs, which is nuts, because this is a better place to live, but we've made it so unfriendly for businesses. So you start with tax reform, and that doesn't just mean the corporate tax, it means personal taxes, it means property taxes. You look at regulations, you look at lawsuit reform. We haven't mentioned that tonight, but that's really an important piece. It's tort reform of some sort, and I agree with Dave that right to work is an important piece of this as well.
We need to not only lower taxes, we need to talk in terms of changing the way we tax. The statewide business property tax is just awful. And it really harms, in particular, small businesses, and we need to get rid of that. We need to take the taxes that create disincentive to stay in the state or come to the state and get rid of them. So we need to reform taxes, and then we need to reduce taxes. And then also, we need to create an environment within our state government in which we are trying to facilitate business growth and facilitate entrepreneurship rather than discourage it. I carried a bill that ultimately did get signed by the governor, we worked that out with him, to set standards for how debt collection companies have to vet their employees to make sure that they're decent people and won't use their debt collection techniques in a wrong way. This Commerce Department under Governor Dayton didn't want to do that. They wanted it left open-ended, and they were just going after these companies in a way that the companies hardly dare expand here. We've got to create a different atmosphere.
We got a question from Twitter while you were answering our question about education and Common Core. The question from Carol asks, do you support the pending Minnesota anti-bullying legislation? We'll begin with Rob.
I don't, because while I'm not in favor of bullying, I'm also not in favor of people who maybe have certain religious beliefs and are expressing their religious beliefs in a non-hurtful way being labeled a bully. And there are no protections in there. You know, if somebody says that the Bible says this about this behavior, they're going to be called a bully. And that is wrong. We live in a country where we have this idea that people have the right to free speech. And free speech will be diminished under this anti-bullying law. And so I am not in favor of it. I'm also not in favor of bullying.
Sure, you want it both ways again. I don't support the anti-bullying legislation, and I think if anybody who actually reads it and has been following it, you can see that it's not about bullying, it's about a political agenda that a certain group of people have, and that is not what we should be doing to our kids. There are anti-bullying policies in place, and I believe every single school district in the state, as there should be, but the way that the direction that this state legislation wants to move it, I think is really kind of sad, and I certainly would fight that as governor.
You know, bullying's not that complicated. If people are engaging in behavior that is harmful to someone else, you stop them. And you have a policy in place, a relatively simple policy as to how you approach it, but you stop it. We don't need lengthy bills that are complicated. I sat through the Senate Education Committee hearing on the very bill that we are discussing now. I looked over to one of my colleagues in the Senate and I said, you know what, we would need teachers on the playground to have legal counsel available constantly. Because of the rules and the regulations and the requirements and the kinds of things that could be deemed bullying, as Rob pointed out. It's silly. We need a policy in place that says, here is the code of conduct. If you violate the code of conduct, here are the steps that we will take to protect the safety of our children. And follow it, and do it, and execute it. And if you have leaders that won't execute it, making more laws in St. Paul won't change it. You gotta change the personnel.
I'll agree with all of the folks that set up here, especially with what Rob said. I'm not in favor of bullying, none of us are. But you're going to have mediation on the playground, you're gonna have to have mediation for a dodgeball game, you're gonna have to have mediation for a kickball game, because every single kid that feels like his turn or her turn was skipped can say that they were bullied by the guy who was pitching, or the kid who was pitching. You know, this is done at the local level, and at the very, very core, you hold the parents responsible for the children. And at a foregone error, if I would have made a bad statement, or if I would have said something harmful to a kid at school, when I went home, the least of my problems was what was gonna happen to me in the principal's office. When I got home, that's when the real trouble was gonna start. Kids don't have that responsibility at home. Parents aren't accepting that responsibility at home. We don't need new laws, more laws on the books, and it needs to be done at the local level, not from St. Paul.
One more from Carol, again on Twitter. Braun is hogging all the free snacks.
It's the secretary of the party, isn't it?
Luckily, Braun is a very common name, so nobody will know which Braun is hogging all the free snacks. Next question, we'll start with you, Jeff Johnson. With declining gas tax revenues, this is a social media question from submitted earlier on Facebook. With declining gas tax revenues, what is your solution to adequately funding road and bridge construction and repair?
Prioritizing and actually making tough choices. That is something the government doesn't do a very good job of, and you can look at almost any level of government. And so what you have to figure out is, I mean, here would be my philosophy on transportation, because there is plenty of money in government for whatever it is that we need to do. Number one, we need to take care of the infrastructure that we already have. So if we have infrastructure that's already in place and it's falling apart, that has to move to the top of the list so that we have safe, efficient roads and bridges. On top of that, then I think you look at what I like to call mobility. Can people get to where they want to go when they want to go there? And if there are areas where they can't do that because there aren't enough lane miles, for example, then that should be next on the priority list. And when I know this isn't the metro, but when it comes to the metro, when I start looking at the bonding bill and where we're putting our transportation dollars, the first thing I'm going to look at is congestion. Are we relieving congestion or not? And then, again, for the metro and some of our population centers, if we do need an extra mode of transportation, it would be buses.
Well, I think the reason, in large part, that we have decreasing gas tax revenues is because cars are, of course, becoming more and more efficient and getting better and better gas mileage, and therefore you're simply buying, you're buying less gas to cover the same territory. We should not raise taxes. We do put enough money into our transportation system. And so what we need to do is, first off, we need to cut out all of the unnecessary programs, all of the unnecessary spending. We need to stop funding transit, as we've talked about before, and then fix the infrastructure that we have. Am I saying that we may never need another dollar to do that? I'm not saying that. That would be an unreasonable thing to say. But we have a lot of things that we can do to reduce spending that's wasteful, that is inefficient, that is funding things that don't help us move from point A to point B before we even think about other sources of revenue. It's fine with me if we force government to get by with just a little bit less.
I think the question about would you raise the gas tax is a misnomer. It's just a way to get us back into the question, would you raise taxes or not? See, all these horrible Republicans won't raise taxes. It's not a need for a tax increase, it's a need for prioritization. That's what you've heard from all of us up here. Again, it starts with a prevailing wage for greater Minnesota that is not tied to the Twin Cities. You could build a lot more road mile out here if you didn't have the Minneapolis prevailing wage, you had your own. Second thing I would do is, my colleagues have said, you prioritize your spending. We are a very populous state. We like to get behind the wheel, drive ourselves where we want to go, and we don't like anybody telling us how we should get there. I am a convert to bus rapid transit. If you come to the cities ever, Maple Grove is a great example. We actually get on the bus in Maple Grove, go all the way into downtown, doesn't stop along the way and make all kinds of unnecessary starts and stops, goes into downtown and comes back out. That works. And if you want to have more cars on the road, then we've actually built more buses, because the cars and the buses, I know the governor and the Democrats don't get this, but cars and buses drive on the same roads. Really quite surprising.
I've touched on this, but I'll touch on it again. I wouldn't raise the gas tax. You know, as governor, I would stop these light rail programs and reallocate those funds. But I would also reallocate money from the general fund. And this is gonna get me in probably a little bit of hot water later, but that's fine. There's plenty of money in the general fund, and I'll give you an example. My wife gets the Sunday newspaper, and we're middle class, we do okay, but I'm cheap. I still have an iPhone 3, I figure it still works, I'm not gonna buy a new one. We try and save money. She clips coupons, she goes online, she clips coupons, she goes in line at the grocery store with 200 coupons, she irritates the cashier, and somebody in front of her or behind her has their EBT card, and there's no coupons, and they're buying steaks. Now, I'm not opposed to helping people who need real help, but there's plenty of money when my wife is cutting coupons and somebody else is just saying, well, we'll just spend this money on whatever we want, and there's no responsibility. If we put personal responsibility into our social welfare programs, there's going to be plenty of money to actually fix the roads that our productive citizens use. Did you guys get that on camera?
Another question from online, from Facebook.